I will take the general consumption tax. The question is that the standing orders be suspended to enable the minister to take the motion notice of which she gave earlier. Those in favour? Aye. Those against? The ayes have it.
Madam Speaker, the matter before us is the general consumption tax, amendment of Schedules Order 2025, and its resolution which supports revenue measures for financial year 2024-2025, included in Ministry Paper number 11/24. The measures being proposed are aimed at bolstering the private security industry amidst the increase in targeted attacks on entities providing armored cash courier services, in addition to ensuring compliance with Jamaica's international trade obligations. Madam Speaker, I will give an overview of the measures. The first measure revises the tax structure for the importation of armored cash courier vehicles. Madam Speaker, I will now move to the second measure addressed by this order, which is the standardizing of Jamaica's general consumption tax, GCT treatment, on raw foodstuff. Madam Speaker, by virtue of Jamaica's membership to the World Trade Organization, WTO, the country is not allowed to implement internal tax measures designed to protect domestically produced products. The utilization of GCT, which is an internal tax currently charged on imported raw foodstuff, but not on locally produced raw foodstuff, could be interpreted as a measure that gives protection to domestically produced raw foodstuff. Madam Speaker, this is considered an uncompetitive practice from the perspective of international trade, and Jamaica risks, at the very least, jeopardizing the relationships with its trading partners. In light of this, Madam Speaker, we are amending the third schedule of the GCT Act to equalize the tax treatment for both domestically produced and imported raw foodstuff. Therefore, both domestically produced and imported raw foodstuff will now be exempt from the payment of GCT. Madam Speaker, this amendment applies generally to the following items: fresh fruit and vegetables, ground provisions, legumes, onions and garlic, meat, chicken, fish, crustacean or mollusks, and corn. Madam Speaker, it should be noted that items previously not considered raw food and subject to GCT will continue to remain subject to the tax. Madam Speaker, although we are removing the GCT on imported raw food stuff, this Honourable House should note that the items in question still attract taxes, primarily common external tariff, CET, and additional stamp duty. The removal of the GCT on imported raw foodstuff preserves our international trading relationships by removing the risk that Jamaica will face trade sanctions from other member states as a result of the discriminatory treatment applied to imported raw foodstuff. In concluding, Madam Speaker, the measures included in this order aim to facilitate investment in the armored cash courier industry and to remove any unnecessary risk to our international trade profile due to distortionary GCT practices. The House is therefore being asked to approve the General Consumption Tax Amendment of Schedules Order 2025 resolution.
Member from St. Andrews Southeastern will respond.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. On the first measure, the opposition has no objection to it. We recognize the importance of cash in our society, and we're fully aware of the number of incidents where cash courier companies have been attacked, people have been killed, and the impact that that has had on the ability of banks to restock their ATM machines and ensure that there is adequate cash. So any measure which facilitates those companies having more armored trucks is certainly something that we would support, and we do. Madam Speaker, on the second measure, we do have concerns about the removal of GCT on imported raw food items. My first question to the Minister, can you indicate which countries, if any, raised an objection to this? And did these objections take place within the ambit of the World Trade Organization, which has a process to deal with objections of this nature? And if you could indicate where within the process that objection got to and whether there was a resolution. I raise this because the removal of GCT on imported items has the potential to negatively impact the local agricultural sector. Notwithstanding what anybody wants to say, we know that developed countries subsidize their agricultural industry to an extent that we don't, very heavily. And while I assume there was some pressure brought on the government to undertake this measure, we operate, trade operates within a rules-based environment. So I want to know who raised the objection, where within the WTO process we got to, what was Jamaica's defense, whether the advice taken to remove the GCT was something done in consultation with the AG's department and other stakeholders, because we don't have a level playing field in this world, and we don't want to undertake measures which will negatively impact our local industry. I know this was introduced by your predecessor. We raised the concerns then. There really wasn't any satisfactory answer provided as to why we were being forced to take this measure. But now that we're here, I would like some answers on that particular issue.
Member from St. Andrew Western.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I'd like to, first of all, I support the measures on the Korea, and I want to adopt this sentiment attached by my colleague from St. Catherine South East. St. Catherine South. Madam Speaker, I want to address the situation as it regards the removal of GCT and agricultural item, including the listing contained in the resolution. Madam Speaker, I can hardly think of a worse time that we'd want to bring this resolution, because the rules in the WTO have been totally upended. The rules affecting trade in the WTO has been totally upended, creating an environment now where developing countries are put at a distinct disadvantage, and small developing countries an even worse disadvantage. The reality is that the rules-based system we agreed to because there was some equity in it for the developing countries. That has now been turned on its head by current policies, trade policies, and measures being adopted by developed countries. In addition to the built-in subsidies and the blue box, green box, yellow box arrangements in agriculture, the imposition of tariff at this point of time has meant that any consideration that we may have had in terms of working with the rules to phase out some of these measures that we have imposed, I think we now have to consider that these are now protective measures in light of what is emerging, what is evolving in terms of trade policies in being imposed in developed countries. I believe, Madam Speaker, that the timing of this could not be any worse. It cannot be any worse, because the impact on our local sector is real and damaging. And it further puts us at a disadvantage by this removal of the tariff at a time when tariff is being imposed. And not only tariff, my understanding is that it's tariff and other measures are being imposed. And so, Madam Speaker, I would strongly urge the Minister to reconsider this particular set of measures. Reconsider them because it will further put the agricultural sector at a further disadvantage. The timing of it is simply, we have yet to understand the full extent of the measures that are being proposed and what are the implications for our economy in general and the agricultural sector in particular. And I would ask and urge that it be deferred so that we have an opportunity to understand what are the evolving set of measures that are being imposed on us at this point of time. I strongly urge that as someone who participated in the WTO arrangement, negotiated Jamaica's accession to the WTO, the imbalances that will be imposed on us by these new fangled measures that are being imposed, I think need to be appreciated, studied, understood, and the impact assessed. I would urge that.
Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I too understand the need for the tax break, essentially, that's been given to our security companies bringing in the armored vehicles. We all know the terrible situation that has been faced by them with the multiple robberies of ATMs and of armored vehicles arriving to either deliver or remove cash. So I don't think anybody in the House would have an issue with that. I also want to endorse a concern raised by my colleague, the member for Western St. Andrew, in relation to the timing of the implementation of this amendment to the GCT Act, third schedule. As has been said, we are now in an era where measures including tariffs, but also not limited to tariffs, all sorts of measures affecting trade are being touted, being pushed, being considered, and it's a very unsettled environment because we don't know where it's all going to end. In the meantime, we are removing a protective measure that was in place for the benefit of local producers of food and exposing them to the loss of that protection. Yes, there may be other import duties and charges that the importers of these items will have to pay, but as has been said, it is well established that for some of our trading partners, there are heavy subsidies that their producers enjoy from the states in which those countries, those producers are producing those food items. So it's not a level playing field in terms of the cost structures that the various competing players have to contend with. And the removal of this at this time seems to me to be premature. And although it was announced in the budget debate a year ago, and it's only coming here now, it seems to me that much has changed since then in terms of the international environment concerning trade. And I think we would be well advised to wait to see how the dust settles before we rush to implement this permanently in our law. And I also endorse and would like to... And I would also like to endorse and look forward to hearing the answers to the questions as to how this particular measure originated. You know, who was bringing pressure against Jamaica on this issue? Which country or countries? Where did it reach in the WTO system? What was Jamaica's stance in relation to any proceedings, if any, that were brought in the WTO system? How were those proceedings or that complaint or complaints, how were they resolved? You know, all we heard was that these protective measures were being removed, but we've never had a satisfactory answer as to why this has happened. And I look forward to the answer to that.
Madam Speaker, I ask the House to recall that the GCT measures were announced by the former Minister Clark as part of the revenue measures of 2024-25, and they were not made into law. It is my understanding as well, with regards to specific countries that object. I understand from our technical persons that all of this happened when Jamaica was doing the review of our trade policy, and this came up by the reviewer. Jamaica's trade policy was being reviewed by the WTO, and it was noted. It was not a specific country, but by way of the process of review. The UK and the EU asked that we correct all measures inconsistent with our WTO obligations, and this happened in 2024. It started, Madam Speaker, with the WTO reviewer in November of 2023, and UK and EU comments occurred in July, August of 2024. Madam Speaker, there are some other questions that the members asked. In order to get those responses, Madam Speaker, I'm going to ask that the debate be suspended until further notice. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Appreciated. Minister. Members.
Madam Speaker, the current standard rate of general consumption tax, or GCT, charged on imported raw foodstuff. Madam Speaker, sorry, there is a standard rate of GCT on imported raw foods, like vegetables. But there's no GCT charge on domestic raw foods. The intention of the policy at the time was to bolster domestic production and act as a safeguard for domestic industries and markets. There is duty, however, on imported raw foods. Unfortunately, Madam Speaker, this policy could be interpreted as government-sponsored protectionism and distorting competition between markets. While the government remains committed to supporting domestic agricultural production, Jamaica is also obligated under the conditions of the conditions set out by virtue of our membership in the WTO, and based on the national treatment principle set out in the General Agreement on Trade and Tariff, GATT, Jamaica is categorically, and I say categorically, not permitted to implement policies or measures that are designed to protect domestic products. We have ASD, we can use those mechanisms, but using domestic taxation like GCT is not allowed. And Jamaica, Madam Speaker, will be blacklisted if that duality remains. And so we have a choice. Either we do it on local or we take it off of foreign. Madam Speaker, in keeping with Jamaica's trade obligations, the GCT on all raw foodstuff, Madam Speaker, imported, Madam Speaker, or domestic, will be removed. This is a measure, Madam Speaker, that will be revenue negative and will result in foregoing $2.4 billion of revenue. And the measure will take place in the first quarter of 2024-25. Although, Madam Speaker, this is a measure that emerges from trade-related matters, it will mean the opportunity to provide more affordable imported raw foodstuff to Jamaican consumers, to increase the chance of these, Madam Speaker. So it's opportune that at this time, what this allows is for cheaper vegetables, Madam Speaker, to be available, Madam Speaker, to the Jamaican customers. Right? No, Madam Speaker, we still have duties on imported foodstuff, on raw foodstuff. Yeah, duties still exist. Okay, but we have to. We don't have a choice. We're not going to wait until the blacklisting from the WTO is final to do something about it. And we can provide you with the evidence to support what we're saying. So, Madam Speaker, to make sure that the benefit of these vegetables reduction coming in go to the customer, Madam Speaker, I've had opportunity to have a conversation with the Minister of Agriculture, where I've suggested to him that in light of this change, it would be good, Madam Speaker, and I'm just throwing it out there, that the number, if you used to have, pick a number, 10 import license for this kind of product, that you move to have 12 or 15, just to make sure that competition keeps the market honest so that the gain passes through to consumers.
My fellow Americans, this is Liberation Day, waiting for a long time. April 2nd, 2025 will forever be remembered as the day American industry was reborn, the day America's destiny was reclaimed, and the day that we began to make America wealthy again. We're going to make it wealthy, good and wealthy. For decades, our country has been looted, pillaged, raped, and plundered by nations near and far, both friend and foe alike. American steel workers, auto workers, farmers, and skilled craftsmen, we have a lot of them here with us today. They really suffered gravely. They watched in anguish as foreign leaders have stolen our jobs, foreign cheaters have ransacked our factories, and foreign scavengers have torn apart our once beautiful American dream. We had an American dream that you don't hear so much about. You did 4 years ago, and you are now, but you don't too often, and for many years and decades even, you didn't hear too much about. Our country and its taxpayers have been ripped off for more than 50 years, but it is not going to happen anymore. It's not going to happen. In a few moments, I will sign a historic executive order instituting reciprocal tariffs on countries throughout the world. Reciprocal, that means they do it to us and we do it to them. Very simple, can't get any simpler than that. This is one of the most important days, in my opinion, in American history. It's our declaration of economic independence. For years, hardworking American citizens were forced to sit on the sidelines as other nations got rich and powerful, much of it at our expense. But now it's our turn to prosper, and in so doing, use trillions and trillions of dollars to reduce our taxes and pay down our national debt, and it'll all happen very quickly. With today's action, we are finally going to be able to make America great again, greater than ever before. Jobs and factories will come roaring back into our country, and you see it happening already. We will supercharge our domestic industrial base. We will pry open foreign markets and break down foreign trade barriers. And ultimately, more production at home will mean stronger competition and lower prices for consumers. This will be indeed the golden age of America. It's coming back. We're going to come back very strongly. For decades, the United States slashed our trade barriers on other countries, while those nations placed massive tariffs on our products and created outrageous non-monetary barriers to decimate our industries. And in many cases, the non-monetary barriers were worse than the monetary ones. They manipulated their currencies, subsidized their exports, stole our intellectual property, imposed exorbitant VAT taxes to disadvantage our products, adopted unfair rules and technical standards, and created filthy pollution havens. They were absolutely filthy, but they always came to us and they said, we're violating, we should pay for it. It's all detailed in a very big report by the U.S. Trade Representative on Foreign Trade Barriers, and I'll just hold it up for you. It's available, and you don't have to pay too much. As I understand it, you'll pay nothing. It's a lot of work, for something, actually, because it's a special book. It's frankly, it's very upsetting when you read it, when you see what people have been doing to us for 30 years. This all happened with no response from the United States of America, none whatsoever. But those days are over. Let me offer just a few examples of the vicious attacks our workers have faced for so many years. The United States charges other countries only a 2.4 tariff on motorcycles. Meanwhile, Thailand and others are charging much higher prices, like 60%. India charges 70%. Vietnam charges 75%, and others are even higher than that. Likewise, until today, the United States has for decades charged a 2.5 tariff. Think of that, 2.5% on foreign-made automobiles. The European Union charges us more than 10% tariffs, and they have 20% VATs, much, much higher. India charges 70%, and perhaps worst of all are the non-monetary restrictions imposed by South Korea, Japan, and very many other nations as a result of these colossal trade barriers. And I say that, friend and foe, and in many cases the friend is worse than the foe in terms of trade. But such horrendous imbalances have devastated our industrial base and put our national security at risk. I don't blame these other countries at all for this calamity. I blame former presidents and past leaders who weren't doing their job. They let it happen, and they let it happen to an extent that nobody can even believe. That's why, effective at midnight, we will impose a 25% tariff on all foreign-made automobiles. Thank you. Brian, I'd like to have you come up here for a second, okay? I just see him sitting. He's been a fan of ours, and he understands this business a lot better than the economists, a lot better than anybody. Brian, say a few words, please, would you?
Thank you, Mr.
Thank you.
President.
It's a great honor to have you. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. President. I grew up just north of Detroit, Michigan, in Macomb County, known as the home of the Reagan Democrats. My first vote for president was for Ronald Reagan. I thought that was going to be the best president I ever saw in my lifetime until Donald J. Trump came along. I have watched my entire life, I have watched plant after plant after plant in Detroit and in the metro Detroit area close. There are now plants sitting idle. There are now plants that are underutilized, and Donald Trump's policies are going to bring product back into those underutilized plants. There's going to be new investment. There's going to be new plants built. And the UAW members, and I brought 20 of them with me, they're sitting right over here. We support Donald Trump's policies on tariffs 100%. So, Mr. President, we can't thank you enough. And in 6 months or a year, we're going to begin to see the benefits. I can't wait to see what's happening 3 or 4 years down the road. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you so much. Thank you. What a great guy. He got it right from the beginning. He got it before almost anybody else. This group over there, they got it too. And you know, we won the state of Michigan. We won almost all of them, but we won Michigan by a lot, and I want to just thank you all. The auto workers were fantastic. The Teamsters were fantastic. Everyone was pretty good, I will tell you. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. You're going to be very happy very soon, and you probably see what's happening with all of the, not only car companies, but car companies in particular. See it with all of the ones they're moving, they're announcing day in, day out. You're seeing it. Nobody's ever seen anything like that. With today's actions, we're also standing up for our great farmers and ranchers who are brutalized by nations all over the world. Brutalized. Canada, by the way, imposes a 250 to 300% tariff on many of our dairy products. They do the first can of milk. They do the first little carton of milk at a very low price, but after that it gets bad, and then it gets up to 275, 300%. So when they're figuring what's Canada charging, they say, oh, about 2%, 3%. But take a look at what happens down the road. When you look a little bit, it's not a pretty picture, and we don't like it, and it's not fair. It's not fair to our farmers. It's not fair to our country. And with countries like Canada, you know, we subsidize a lot of countries and keep them going and keep them in business. In the case of Mexico, it's $300 billion a year. In the case of Canada, it's close to $200 billion a year. And I say, why are we doing this? Why are we doing this? I mean, at what point do we say, you got to work for yourselves and you got to, this is why we have the big deficits. This is why we have that amount of debt that's been placed on our heads over the last number of years. And we're really not taking it anymore. Through non-tariff barriers, the European Union bans imports of most American poultry. You understand? They say, we want to send you our cars, we want to send you everything, but we're not going to take anything that you have. Australia bans, and they're wonderful people and wonderful everything, but they ban American beef, yet we imported $3 billion of Australian beef from them just last year alone. They won't take any of our beef. They don't want it because they don't want it to affect their farmers. And you know what? I don't blame them, but we're doing the same thing right now, starting about midnight tonight, I would say. And China charges American rice farmers an overquota, it's called, a tariff rate of 65%. South Korea charges 50%. Actually, they charge different, from 50% to 513%. And Japan, our friend, charges us 700%. But that's because they don't want us selling rice and other things. Who can blame them, Madam Secretary? Agriculture, great job you did on eggs, by the way. The egg prices came down 50%. You got them down 50% once we got involved. They were going through the sky. The egg prices, they were going through the sky, and you did a fantastic job. Now we have lots of eggs, and they're much cheaper, down about 59% now, and they're going down further. We charge 2.8% for so many things that other countries are charging 200%, 300%, and 400% for. If imposing tariffs and protective barriers made nations poor, then every country on earth would be racing to eliminate these policies, and China would be the first on line. They run a very strong country, but they're not first in line, and the American people are paying a very big price. But it's not too late any longer, and we're going to start being smart, and we're going to start being very wealthy again. We're going to be wealthy as a country because they've taken so much of our wealth away from us. We're not going to let that happen. We truly can be very wealthy. We can be so much wealthier than any country. It's not even believable, but we're getting smart. Nearly a century later, in the face of unrelenting economic warfare, the United States can no longer continue with a policy of unilateral economic surrender. We cannot pay the deficits of Canada, Mexico, and so many other countries. We used to do it. We can't do it anymore. We take care of countries all over the world. We pay for their military. We pay for everything they have to pay, and then when you want to cut back a little bit, they get upset that you're not taking care of them any longer. But we have to take care of our people, and we're going to take care of our people first, and I'm sorry to say that. And today we're standing up for the American worker, and we are finally putting America first. In Sleepy Joe Biden's last year in office, the United States hemorrhaged 100,000 manufacturing jobs, and the number was going through the roof at levels never seen before. And our trade deficit reached a record $1.2 trillion, which is unheard of. In short, chronic trade deficits are no longer merely an economic problem. They're a national emergency that threatens our security and our very way of life. It's a very great threat to our country. And for these reasons, starting tomorrow, the United States will implement reciprocal tariffs on other nations. It's been a long time since we even thought of that. We used to think about it a lot. We didn't think about it for many decades, and you see what's happened. For nations that treat us badly, we will calculate the combined rate of all their tariffs, non-monetary barriers, and other forms of cheating. And because we are being very kind, we're kind people, very kind. You're not so kind when you got ripped off with your salaries. My auto worker friends and my Teamster friends and all of the unions that typically voted Democrat. They're not voting Democrat anymore because worker, whether union or non-worker, they're for the Republicans now. That's what happened. But we will charge them approximately half of what they are and have been charging us. So the tariffs will be not a full reciprocal. I could have done that, yes, but it would have been tough for a lot of countries who didn't want to do that. I'd like to see the chart if you have it. Could you bring it up, Howard? This is our great Secretary of Commerce, Howard Lutnick. Thanks, Howard. So if you look at that, China, first row, China, 67%. That's tariffs charged to the USA, including currency manipulation and trade barriers. So 67%, I think you can, for the most part, see it. Those with good eyes, with bad eyes. We didn't want to bring, it's very windy out here, we didn't want to bring out the big charts because it had no chance of standing. Fortunately, we came armed with a little smaller chart. So it's 67%, so we're going to be charging a discounted reciprocal tariff of 34%. I think, in other words, they charge us, we charge them less, so how can anybody be upset? They will be because we never charge anybody anything, but now we're going to charge. European Union, they're very tough, very, very tough traders. You know, you think of European Union, very friendly. They rip us off. It's so sad to see. It's so pathetic. 39%, we're going to charge them 20%, so we're charging them essentially half. Vietnam, great negotiators, great people. They like me, I like them. The problem is they charge us 90%. We're going to charge them 46% tariff. Taiwan, where they took all of our computer chips and semiconductors. We used to be the king, right? We were everything. We had all of it. Now we have almost none of it, except the biggest company is coming in. We're going to end up with almost 40%. Lee Zeldin's working to get their approvals. And it's an amazing company. Mr. Wei, of one of the great companies of the world, actually. They're coming in from Taiwan, and they're going to build one of the biggest plants in the world, maybe the biggest for that. But 64%, we're going to charge them 32%. Japan, very, very tough, great people. And again, I don't blame the people for doing it. I think they're very smart in doing it. I blame the people that sat right in that Oval Office, right over there, right behind the Resolute desk or whichever desk they chose. Japan, 46%. They would charge us 46%, and much higher for certain items like cars, you know, little items like cars. 46%, we're charging them 24%. India, very, very tough, very, very tough. The Prime Minister just left, and he's a great friend of mine, but I said, you're a friend of mine, but you're not treating us right. They charge us 52%. You have to understand, we charge them almost nothing for years and years and decades, and it was only 7 years ago when I came in, we started with China, charged them. We took in hundreds of billions of dollars from China in tariffs, and they understood, honestly. President Xi understood. He said, look, I understand, and the other countries, and they all understand. We're going to have to go through a little tough love, maybe, but they all understand. They're ripping us off, and they understood it. Prime Minister of Japan, Shinzo Abe. He was a fantastic man. He was unfortunately taken from us, assassination. But I went to him and I said, Shinzo, we have to do something. Trade is not fair. And he said, I know that, I know that. And he was a great gentleman. He was a fantastic man, but he understood immediately what I was talking about. I said, Shinzo, we have to do something. He said, I know that. And we worked out a deal, and it would have been a much better deal, but frankly, there were many years left on the deal that was made previous to my getting there, but it was something. If you look at Switzerland, 61% to 31%. Indonesia, Malaysia, Cambodia. Oh, look at Cambodia, 97%. We're going to bring it down to 49. They made a fortune with the United States of America. United Kingdom, 10%, and we'll go 10%. So we'll do the same thing. South Africa, 60%, 30%, and they've got some bad things going on in South Africa. You know, we're paying them billions of dollars, and we cut the funding because a lot of bad things are happening in South Africa. The fake news ought to be looking at it. They don't want to report it. Brazil, 10%, 10%. Bangladesh is 74%. So you see what's going on. Pakistan, 58%. Sri Lanka, 88%. So what we're doing is we're taking not the full, we could take the full 88%. Thanks a lot. He's doing a very good job. How's he doing, all right? I think you better take it with you. It's not going to last very long. He's going to put it, it's going to follow you down with the wind. I brought a hat just in case it got too windy, but here, would anybody like a hat? I'm not giving it to a cabinet. I'm giving it to the auto workers. Come here. Thank you, fellas. Get it. That's it. That's it. They deserve it more than our cabinet. Our cabinet has plenty of hats. But you see the numbers. The numbers are so disproportionate. They're so unfair. At the same time, we will establish a minimum baseline tariff of 10%. You notice that on the chart. And that'll be on other countries to help rebuild our economy and to prevent cheating. So we're going to have a minimum of cheating, and we're going to be very severe on the people that at the gate that watch the tariffs and watch the product coming in, because there's been a lot of bad things happening at the gate because the money is so enormous that you're talking about. There's never been probably anything like it in terms of the enormity, and there are a lot of bad things happen at the people that do the check-in, and they're looking at 10-year jail sentences if they do play. We're going to treat them so good, but if they cheat, the repercussions are going to be extremely strong. Foreign nations will finally be asked to pay for the privilege of access to our market, the biggest market in the world. We're right now the biggest market in the world. We had a great country 4 years ago in terms of the economics. We were doubling up on China. We were doing so well. Nobody was going to catch us, but so much of it slipped away over the last 4 years under Biden. I campaigned on this policy throughout last year, and today that promise was made, and it was also a promise, as you know, that was kept. Promises made, promises kept. To any company that objects to our common sense reciprocal tariffs, again, reciprocal, back and forth, back and forth. And I call this kind reciprocal. This is not full reciprocal. This is kind reciprocal. But what we do is we cut it in half. We charge them. My answer is very simple if they complain. If you want your tariff rate to be zero, then you build your product right here in America, because there is no tariff if you build your plant, your product in America. And we've seen companies coming in like we've never seen before. Likewise to all of the foreign presidents, prime ministers, kings, queens, ambassadors, and everyone else who will soon be calling to ask for exemptions from these tariffs. I say, terminate your own tariffs, drop your barriers, don't manipulate your currencies. They manipulate their currencies like nobody can even believe, which is a bad, bad thing and very devastating to us. And start buying tens of billions of dollars of American goods. Tariffs give our country protection against those that would do us economic harm. And many people were looking to do us economic harm. Maybe not so obviously, but they were doing tremendous economic harm. But even more importantly, they will give us growth. These tariffs are going to give us growth like you haven't seen before, and it'll be something very special to watch. I am so looking forward, and Brian, it's going to happen even faster than you said. You know, you might say, but it's already started. It's already started. Work's already begun on plants all around the country, and you see that as before. These are big, rich companies. We have $61 billion started on a big plant going up. It's going to be announced over the next 2 days, and they already started work. Many of these the biggest companies in the world, they've committed to build. We're going to build, sir. And they came here to see me, and wanted to know if they could have a press conference. I do as many as I can. I'm pretty busy trying to stop Russia and Ukraine and the Middle East. We got to stop that. We got to stop the Houthis, which we're making tremendous. They like shooting ships down and out of the water, sinking ships. They get a kick out of it, but they're not getting such a kick out of it now, are they?
The question is that the debate be suspended at this time. Those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it. Minister?
Members, please. Members, Madam Speaker, I now invite you to ask the Minister of Finance and Planning and member for St. Andrew Eastern to close the debate on the Appropriations Act. May it please you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, House Leader. The Honourable Favour Williams, MP, Minister of Finance and the Public Service, will now close the debate.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Speaker.